Night had fully settled over the little Oregon town, draping the house in shadows. The rain hadn't let up. It poured steadily, streaking the windows with silver lines. Inside, the fireplace glowed low and steady, filling the room with a soft warmth that contrasted sharply with the storm raging outside. Rachel stood by the kitchen sink, staring into the window. It was dark now, so the glass reflected her own image back at her. Her loose pajamas, her damp hair, her bare face. She saw not the woman she once was, but the woman she had become. A widow, someone who had learned to exist in silence, someone who had hidden from life for far too long. Behind her, Ethan sat quietly at the table. He hadn't moved since his confession, hadn't pushed her further, hadn't begged or demanded. He simply sat there, waiting. His patience made it harder, not easier. Because it showed her that his words weren't born of impulse, he meant them. Rachel pressed her palms against the counter. Closing her eyes, her chest rose and fell with shaky breaths. She felt caught between two lives, the one she had already lived with Daniel, and the one standing before her now, uncertain, dangerous, but alive. Her husband's memory lingered in every corner of the house. She could almost hear his laugh in the hall, almost see him walking in, brushing rain from his shoulders, telling her about his day. He had been her safe harbor, her love, her anchor. Losing him had left her adrift, and now Ethan. He was like a storm, uninvited, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. He carried pieces of Daniel in his eyes and voice, but he wasn't Daniel. He was his own man, younger, stronger, yet carrying a gentleness that reached her in ways she hadn't expected. Her throat tightened. How can I even think of this? Rachel, Ethan's voice broke the silence, soft but firm. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to dishonor him. But I can't stand here and pretend anymore. You mean more to me than I can explain. She turned slowly, her eyes finding his. He was standing now, no longer the boy she remembered at the funeral, but a man who had chosen this moment, this truth. His face was steady, but his eyes betrayed his vulnerability. Rachel's voice trembled when she finally spoke. Do you have any idea what you're asking? If I take one step toward you, Ethan, there's no going back. The family, the whispers, even my own heart may never forgive me. He didn't flinch. No. But I also know what it feels like to walk away from something you were meant to fight for. And I can't do that again. Not with you. Her tears returned, blurring her vision. She wanted to tell him to leave, to save them both from the fire they were playing with. But her heart ached with something else longing. She whispered, almost to herself, Daniel loved you like a son. He'd never. I loved him too, Ethan interrupted gently. And if he were here, none of this would exist. But he's gone, Rachel, and you're still here. So am I. And we're both alive. The word alive echoed in her chest. How long had it been since she felt alive? Since someone's presence filled the empty space Daniel had left behind. Rachel shook her head, her hands trembling. It's too soon. Too complicated. Ethan stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt his warmth. His voice was quiet, tender, as if he knew the fragile line she was walking. Maybe it's not about time. Maybe it's about whether you're ready to let yourself live again. Her breath caught. She searched his face, every line, every detail. He wasn't asking for her past. He wasn't even asking for her future. He was asking for now. The rain beat harder against the windows. The fire crackled low, filling the silence. Rachel's tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, If I open this door, everything changes. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. Maybe it's time everything did. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. She reached out, her hand trembling, and for a moment she hovered in that space between caution and surrender. Ethan didn't move, didn't force it. He simply waited, letting her decide. Rachel's fingers brushed his hand. The contact was featherlight, tentative, but it sent a rush of warmth through her veins. She drew in a shaky breath, torn between guilt and the undeniable truth that she wanted this. Her mind screamed warnings. Her heart whispered possibilities. For the first time in years, Rachel felt the world tilt, Not from grief, but from choice. She closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her cheek, and whispered, "I'm not ready." Her voice broke, trembling, before she added, "But maybe I want to be." When she opened her eyes, Ethan's expression softened, relief and tenderness washing over his features. He didn't pull her into his arms. He didn't cross the final line. He only held her hand carefully, reverently, as if even this fragile touch was more sacred than words. And in that quiet kitchen, with rain pouring outside and the fire burning low, Rachel realized her life had shifted. Not completely, not fully, not yet, but enough. Enough to remind her she was still capable of feeling, still capable of being seen, still capable of choosing something new. The night would end. The storm would pass. But Rachel knew nothing could return to the way it was, because Ethan had knocked on her door when she wasn't ready. And maybe, just maybe, he had given her a reason to be. Her heart gave a painful jolt. His words were gentle, but they carried weight. She hadn't expected him to think of her at all, much less admit it. For years, she had moved through life quietly, almost invisible to the world. To hear that someone he had thought of her, worried for her, unsettled her deeply. "Ethan," she said softly, "you didn't have to carry that burden. I've managed. I know you have," he said quickly, his voice thick with sincerity. "You've always been strong. But strength doesn't mean you didn't hurt. And I hated not being there, not trying to help." Rachel's throat tightened. She looked away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. She felt seen in a way she hadn't in years, and it frightened her, because being seen also meant being vulnerable. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. This one was heavier, more charged. Every sound, the clock ticking, the rain beginning to patter against the windows, seemed sharper. Like the world was holding its breath. Rachel forced a small smile, trying to lighten the moment. "You've grown up, Ethan. I barely recognize you." His expression softened, but his eyes didn't lose that quiet intensity. "And you haven't changed at all. You're still—" He stopped, catching himself, but the words hung in the air anyway. Rachel's pulse quickened. She didn't ask what he meant, but she didn't need to. She could feel it. Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. The room felt smaller, warmer, as though the walls themselves knew something had shifted. Rachel told herself it was just grief, just memory, just loneliness twisting her emotions. But deep down, a different truth pressed against her heart. This wasn't just family visiting. This was a man she hadn't been ready to face. A man who carried pieces of her past and stirred possibilities she wasn't sure she dared to imagine. And in that kitchen, with coffee growing cold between them, Rachel realized the morning had already crossed a line she could never uncross. The rain had started sometime in the afternoon, soft at first, then steadier, tapping against the windows as though echoing Rachel's restless heart. She and Ethan had drifted from the kitchen to the living room, almost without words, as if both were following an unspoken pull neither wanted to admit. Rachel lit the fireplace, its glow painting the room in warm amber. She told herself it was only to fight off the damp chill from outside. But she knew the truth. The quiet house felt too still, too full of things unsaid. The fire gave them something to look at besides each other. Ethan settled into the armchair, though his posture wasn't relaxed. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped tightly, like a man preparing himself for something difficult. Rachel sat across from him on the couch, legs drawn under her, her coffee forgotten on the table. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of wood and the rhythm of the rain. Rachel felt the silence pressing against her chest. It wasn't the silence of strangers, nor even of family who had nothing to say. It was the kind of silence that came when words were too dangerous, too heavy, yet impossible to hold back forever. Ethan was the first to break it. "Aunt Rachel," he began softly, then stopped, shaking his head. "No, I shouldn't call you that anymore." Rachel's breath caught. She looked up, startled by the sudden intensity in his tone. "What do you mean?" He lifted his head, and for the first time that day, his eyes didn't look away. They locked with her steady, unflinching, raw. "You're not just his wife. You're not just Aunt Rachel to me. You never were." Her chest tightened. She forced a shaky laugh, hoping to brush it away, but the sound fell flat. "Ethan, don't. I have to," he interrupted, his voice breaking slightly with urgency. "Do you know what it was like? Watching you at the funeral. You were shattered, but you stood tall anyway. You carried everything his memory, the family's grief, your own pain. I've never seen anyone so strong. And ever since then, I've thought about you. More than I should have." Rachel's lips parted, but no sound came. Her heart thudded against her ribs, loud enough she feared he might hear it. Ethan leaned forward, his voice lowering, filled with confession. "I tried to bury it. I told myself it was wrong, that you were untouchable. But the truth is, I've carried it all these years. I stayed away because I was afraid of how I felt. Afraid you'd see it in my eyes." The fire popped, sparks dancing upward. Rachel swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to deny what she heard, to insist it was just misplaced grief, a young man's confusion. But deep inside, something stirred, something she didn't want to admit had been there too. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This isn't right." His eyes softened, but his voice did not falter. "Then why does it feel so real?" Rachel looked away, her gaze landing on the photographs above the mantel. Daniel's smile, forever frozen in frames, seemed to watch her. Guilt swept over her in waves. How could she even sit here listening to this, letting her heart betray the man she loved? And yet her chest burned with life she hadn't felt in years. Since Daniel's death, her days had been gray, each one blending into the next. But now, with Ethan's words lingering in the air, she felt something dangerous, terrifying, and alive. She forced herself to speak, though her voice trembled. "You're grieving too. That's all this is. You're confusing loss for something else." Ethan shook his head. "No, I know grief. I've carried it too. But this is not grief. It's you. It's always been you." Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand to her lips, trying to steady herself. The room spun with the weight of his words, the pull of memories. The fire's glow making everything feel more intimate, more impossible to escape. Rachel's mind screamed to set a boundary, to remind him of family ties, of what was proper. But her heart whispered that it had been too long since anyone looked at her not as a widow, not as someone broken, but as a woman. The silence stretched again, heavy and trembling with possibility. Finally, Rachel managed to whisper, "If Daniel were here." She broke off, unable to finish, her throat closing. Ethan's voice gentled. "If he were here, I'd never say a word. But he's gone. And nothing we do, nothing we feel can change that. All I know is that you've been alone, and so have I. And I can't keep pretending that doesn't matter." His words sank deep, cutting through her defenses. Rachel's tears spilled over, sliding down her cheeks. She hated herself for wanting to believe him, for wanting to let go just for a moment. Ethan leaned back, giving her space, his hands still clasped as though holding himself in check. "I'm not asking you for anything, Rachel. Not now, not ever, if you don't want it. But I had to tell you. I had to let you know before I lost the chance again." The fire's warmth wrapped around them, but Rachel shivered. She was caught in a storm she hadn't seen coming. Her mind told her to shut this down, to draw the line firmly, to protect both of them from the dangerous road ahead. And yet, when she looked at him, at the honesty in his face, the longing in his eyes, she couldn't. Her breath shook as she whispered, "Ethan, if we let this go any further, everything changes." He didn't move, didn't break eye contact. His voice was steady, certain. "Maybe it's time everything did." Rachel sat frozen, her tears drying on her cheeks, her hands trembling in her lap. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. And yet part of her longed to be. The fire crackled again, sparks leaping like the unspoken truth between them. And in that fragile, dangerous moment, Rachel realized this was no longer about grief. This was about a choice she wasn't sure she had the strength to make. Rachel never thought mornings could feel this heavy. It had been 3 years since her husband, Daniel, passed away. Yet the silence of the house still pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. She lived alone in a modest home on the edge of a quiet Oregon town, where the mornings often began with nothing more than the sound of rain tapping against the window or birds calling in the distance. This particular Sunday morning had been like any other. She woke later than usual, wrapped herself in her soft cotton pajamas, and tied her hair into a messy bun. No makeup, no presentation. Just Rachel in her raw, unpolished state, the way she only ever allowed herself to be when she knew no one was watching. The coffee machine hummed, filling the kitchen with that rich, bitter smell that gave her a small sense of comfort. She cradled her mug, blowing lightly across the steaming surface. Her mind wandered the way it always did toward Daniel. She could almost picture him sitting across from her at the kitchen table, reading the Sunday paper, glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. That memory was a quiet ache she carried everywhere. The knock came suddenly. It wasn't the hesitant kind neighbors used when they dropped by to return a dish or ask about the weather. It was firm, decisive. Rachel froze in the middle of her sip, nearly spilling her coffee. Her first thought was, no one comes here without calling. She set the cup down carefully, her hands trembling just a little. Another knock followed, this one louder, more insistent. Rachel's mind raced. It was too early for deliveries, too unexpected for friends. Her heart began to beat faster, a nervous rhythm echoing through her chest. She glanced at herself in the hallway mirror as she made her way to the door. Pajamas, loose, soft, and far too revealing in the wrong light. Her cheeks warmed. Whoever it was, they would have to take her as she was. With a shaky breath, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. The sight on the other side made her freeze. Ethan, her late husband's nephew. She hadn't seen him in years, not since the funeral. Back then, he had been a lanky, uncertain young man in his 20s, his grief awkward and quiet. But standing before her now was someone different. His shoulders were broader, his stance more confident, his jawline sharper with the weight of adulthood. His hair was darker than she remembered, a little longer, falling across his forehead. But what caught her off guard were his eyes. Those eyes, the same striking blue as Daniel's? Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She clutched the doorframe for support. It was like seeing a shadow of her husband come back to life. Yet not. Ethan's gaze held youth, something searching, something unspoken. "Rachel," he said softly, his voice carrying hesitation, like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. I didn't mean to come unannounced, but I was passing through town and I had to see you." Her lips parted, but no words came at first. She was aware of every detail, the cool air rushing in behind him, the way her heart pounded painfully, the fact that she stood there in nothing but pajamas, exposed, unprepared. She finally found her voice, though it trembled. "Ethan, you should have called." He shifted on his feet, running a hand over the back of his neck in a gesture that reminded her of his younger self. That same boyish habit, but now in a man's frame. "I know. If I called, maybe I would have lost my nerve. I didn't want to risk it." Rachel swallowed hard. The words were simple, yet they pierced her. He hadn't just stopped by casually. This visit had weight, for a moment. She wanted to close the door, retreat into the safety of her silence, hide behind the walls she had built since Daniel's death. But she couldn't. Something in Ethan's eyes held her there, rooted, unable to walk away. She noticed then how tall he had grown, how the years had changed him. And with that realization came another, one she didn't want to admit even to herself. He wasn't just Daniel's nephew anymore. He was a man standing at her doorstep, looking at her with something that felt deeper than politeness. Rachel crossed her arms lightly over her chest, suddenly self-conscious of her thin pajama fabric. "It's been a long time," she whispered. "Too long," Ethan answered, his voice low, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. The silence that stretched between them was charged, like the air before a storm. Rachel's heart ached with a mix of grief and something dangerously close to longing. She hated herself for it. Hated that in the lines of Ethan's face she saw Daniel's reflection. Hated that in his presence she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. She wasn't ready for this. Not the knock. Not the sight of him. Not the feelings she couldn't control. And yet, standing in the doorway, Rachel realized one thing with terrifying clarity: life had just changed in ways she couldn't predict. The coffee on the counter was growing cold. The morning was no longer ordinary, and Ethan, her husband's nephew, had just brought the past, the present, and the dangerous possibility of the future right to her front door. Rachel stepped aside, the weight of hesitation heavy in her chest, and let Ethan inside. The act itself felt dangerous, as if she were opening not only the door to her home, but also to emotions she had kept carefully locked away. The air outside was cool, but inside the house, warmth lingered from the brewing coffee. Ethan stepped into the entryway and paused, his eyes scanning the familiar yet unchanged surroundings. The same photographs still lined the hallway walls, many of them of Daniel, his uncle, and Rachel together. Wedding pictures, vacations, holidays. It was as though the house had been frozen in time, holding on to a man who no longer walked its rooms. Rachel noticed where Ethan's gaze landed. On the framed picture near the staircase, Daniel in his work shirt, laughing, with his arm wrapped around her. Her heart tightened. She thought of taking the photo down more times than she could count, but she never could. That picture was the last one taken before Daniel got sick. "You haven't changed a thing," Ethan murmured, his voice quiet but reverent. Rachel pressed her arms around herself as though shielding her heart. "I didn't have the strength to." The words slipped out before she realized how raw they sounded. Ethan looked at her with an understanding that unsettled her. He wasn't just glancing at the house, he was seeing her. "Come into the kitchen," she said quickly. Turning away, he followed her, and the sound of his footsteps behind her stirred a wave of memories. How many mornings had Daniel walked that same path, rubbing his eyes, asking if the coffee was ready? The familiarity was painful, but now it was different. Ethan's presence filled the space in a new way. Unfamiliar, yet not unwelcome. Rachel busied herself with the coffee pot, pouring 2 cups, though her hands trembled just enough for her to notice. She slid one across the table toward Ethan and sat opposite him, trying to act casual, though the air between them felt thick. At first, they sipped in silence. The ticking of the old wall clock grew louder with every passing second. Rachel's mind screamed for normal conversation, but nothing ordinary seemed possible. Finally, Ethan broke the quiet. His voice was deeper than she remembered, steady but edged with vulnerability. "I've been meaning to come for years," he admitted. "But every time I tried, I stopped myself. I didn't know if I was ready. And I didn't know if you were." Rachel's fingers tightened around her mug. She looked up at him, studying the shape of his face, so familiar and yet so changed. He was no longer the boy at the funeral, hiding his grief in silence. This was a man speaking openly, confessing truths she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. "You look so much like him," she whispered, the words slipping out unbidden. Ethan held her gaze, his lips pulled into a small, sad smile. "I hear that a lot. Sometimes I hate it. Sometimes I'm proud of it." He was a good man. The ache in Rachel's chest grew sharper. "He was the best," she replied, her voice breaking softly. For a moment, they were both quiet, each lost in memories of the man who had shaped their lives so differently. For Rachel, Daniel had been her husband, her anchor, her partner. For Ethan, he had been an uncle who stepped in like a father after his own left. The loss tied them together. It also created a gulf. Neither had dared to cross, until now. Ethan shifted in his chair, leaning slightly forward. His hand reached for the sugar bowl, brushing against Rachel's fingers as she reached for it too. The contact was brief, accidental, but electric. Rachel pulled her hand back quickly, her cheeks flushing with heat she couldn't explain. He noticed. She could see it in the flicker of his eyes. The way his gaze lingered on her, a heartbeat too long. Rachel turned her attention to her coffee. Stirring it, though, it didn't need stirring. Anything to avoid his eyes. You must have been busy all these years, she said. Her tone a little too brisk. A weak attempt to shift the mood. I was, Ethan admitted. Work, life. But no matter how much I did, there was always this emptiness. This feeling I'd left something unfinished. I kept thinking about you, Rachel. Wondering how you were. Wondering if you were okay.